The wind moved gently over the land like a whisper from another world, dry, steady, and full of secrets. Clara Winslow stood beside her cabin watching the dusk settle over the land like ash. She held a battered pail in one hand, her back sore from chopping wood that morning. The well had been low all week, and she'd begun rationing water for the garden, the mule and herself in that order. She had grown used to the silence since being dismissed from the parish school last fall. Some said she had taught the wrong children. Others said she asked the wrong questions. What no one said aloud was that she had let Apache boys slip into the schoolroom when no one was looking, that she had taught them to read their own names. She never claimed innocence, only decency. Now she lived past the last cedar tree, in a place the townsfolk pretended didn't exist. The mule brayed once, low and uneasy. That's when she saw, near the fence line slumped in the tall grass like a dropped cloak, was a figure. At first she thought it was a deer, then a sack. Then she saw the bare foot. Clara froze. The light was failing fast, but even in the haze she could see the outline of a boy. Maybe 16 or 17, his skin dark with dust, his hair tangled and long, blood stained the back of his shirt, the color already rusting under the evening sky. She should have gone back inside, should have bolted the door and drawn the curtains. Instead, she set the pail down slowly, stepped off the porch and crossed the brittle field. He didn't move. He was lying on his side, breathing shallow. One arm was twisted awkwardly beneath him. The other stretched toward the trough as if he'd been crawling. His lips were cracked, his chest barely lifted. Apache, there was no doubt. His necklace was made of beads and bone, with a single feather clinging to the cord by a thread. Her pulse quickened. Every warning whispered in church pews came flooding. Back. They'll rob you blind. Burn your roof. Take your scalp. She glanced toward the trees. No one. No riders. No smoke. No war party. Just a boy bleeding into her fence line. She took a step back. Then another. But then he opened his eyes. Not wide. Not all the way. Just a flicker of dark beneath the lashes. Glazed and wild. He didn't speak. Didn't reach for her. His lips parted. A sound came. Soft. Hoarse. Not even a word. Just a rasp of need. Her eyes dropped. At the pail in her hand. Then back at the boy. The weight of decision settled on her chest like a stone. She could walk away. No one would know. No one would blame her. But she would. Minutes later she returned with a dented tin cup full of her best water. The cleanest she had left. Kneeling beside him, she slipped an arm under his shoulders, lifting him just enough to press the cup to his lips. At first, nothing. Then his throat worked, and he took a sip. One, then another. A tear slid from one eye. Not from pain, but from something deeper. Something like disbelief. When he finished, she laid him gently back and watched his eyes flutter closed. She sat there for a long while. The night grew cold around them, and still she didn't move. Tomorrow, she thought, she'd figure out what to do, but tonight she would not let him die. Not here. Not like this. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat by the small window with her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, the rifle across her lap, not loaded, not clean, not even hers. It had belonged to the old preacher who sold her the cabin for half its worth, along with a warning. You're too close to people who don't follow our ways. She hadn't argued. Arguing never saved anyone. The boy lay on a bed of old wool blankets near the hearth, pale and still. She had done what she could. Cleaned the wound with boiled rainwater, pressed salve from the last of her calendula. She didn't know if it would be enough. The bullet had gone clean through, but the fever might settle in if it hadn't already. She hadn't asked his name, hadn't spoken a word really. Words felt heavy, like they didn't belong between them. What haunted her wasn't just it was the memory. 3 winters ago, when she was still teaching behind the church hall, a boy named Loma came to her classroom. No shoes, no English, just eyes like storms and a hunger to understand. He had drawn pictures in the dirt outside her door until she finally invited him in. He never spoke much, but he learned. He learned fast, and then one day he vanished. They said his parents took him away, but she had seen the bruises on his arms the week before. The boy on her floor now. He looked like Loma. Same angle to the jaw, same quiet intensity, even in pain. A cousin, perhaps. A brother. Her stomach turned. She wasn't a healer. She wasn't even welcome in town anymore. But she had water, and she had chosen. By morning she had fallen into a doze, only to jolt awake to the sound of hooves. Not one. She stood, heart pounding, and peeked through the crack in the wooden door. They were coming from the east. riding low and fast across the horizon, silhouettes in the golden dawn, horses silent as the wind, their faces painted, impossible to read. Warriors, her throat tight. Within minutes, the cabin was surrounded. They didn't shout, they didn't draw weapons, they didn't dismount. They just watched. One man moved forward, older, broad-shouldered, his gray hair braided back, his gaze sharp and unmoving. He wore no badge of rank, no visible weapon, only a necklace, made of turquoise and polished horn. His eyes locked with hers through the window straight at her. She didn't move. Behind her, the boys stirred faintly. A low groan, a shifting of limbs. She turned to him, unsure whether to speak, to hide, to run. Then came a knock, soft, not demanding, not angry, just patient. The kind of knock that said, "We already know. You're here. We're only asking because we choose to." Clara took a breath, opened the door. The older man stood just beyond the threshold, eyes unreadable. He didn't glance inside, didn't try to step past her. Then he said a name. Tayo. The boy behind her stirred again. The man's jaw clenched, not in anger but something else. Something like pain buried under years of practice. He looked at Clara and asked, low and deliberate, "What did you do?" His English was accented but clear. Clara's voice caught in her throat. "He was dying," she said. "I helped him because he needed it." A long silence. The man didn't nod, didn't blink. He stepped to the side, and behind him a dozen more faces turned toward her cabin. Silent, waiting, watchful. Then he said, "We will stay here." Her brow furrowed. "Why?" He didn't answer. He turned and walked back toward the others. And just like that they began to dismount. They tethered their horses, sat on the ground, lit no fires, spoke no words. They formed a quiet circle around her home, as if building a wall not of wood but of eyes. Clara stepped back inside, closed the door and leaned against it. Her legs shook. She looked at the boy on the blanket, still too pale, still too quiet. She hadn't been thanked, but she hadn't been killed either. Outside, the sound of hooves faded into stillness. They were here now and they weren't leaving. The second day was colder, not in the air but in the way it settled. Like something sacred was being weighed and no one dared disturb the scale. Outside the cabin, the warriors remained still. They didn't glance at her window. They didn't speak. But they never looked away. They didn't have to. Inside, Clara moved carefully, as if her own footsteps might shatter the fragile silence. Pressing down on the house, she boiled water, cleaned the wound again, wiped the boy's forehead with a damp cloth. He hadn't opened his eyes since morning. Once, she thought she heard one of the men outside whisper something, low, rhythmic, like a prayer to the wind. But when she pressed her ear to the wall, there was only stillness again. A kind of silence that wasn't absence but presence restrained. She was being watched, not with suspicion but with judgment. Not like a criminal, like someone on trial. And the jury didn't blink. By late afternoon, the boy stirred. A groan escaped his lips, dry, broken. Clara dropped to her knees beside him and helped him sit up just slightly. His face was damp with sweat, his lips chapped and gray. "Easy," she said softly. His eyes opened, just a sliver, dark, clouded with confusion but alive. He tried to speak, only a rasp came. She poured water into the tin cup and held it to his mouth. This time he drank more. His gaze flicked past her shoulder toward the door. He tensed. "They're here," she said, not knowing if he understood. The others. His fingers gripped her wrist, not hard but firm. His mouth moved again, trying to form words. She leaned in. He managed one. "Uncle." She blinked. The older man. He nodded faintly, then winced and sank back onto the blanket. Clara sat beside him, her back to the wall, heart still racing. If that man outside was his uncle, then this was not an act of revenge. It was a reclamation. And if they had come to reclaim him, then why were they still waiting? Why the silence? That night she lit the oil lamp and pulled a stool near the door. She didn't feel like sleeping. Couldn't really. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Somewhere a coyote cried, far off but sharp. The warriors had built no fires. They simply sat, like stones, like roots, like shadows of something older than the trees themselves. Then footsteps, slow, measured. A soft knock. She opened the door a crack. It was him, the uncle. He didn't ask to come in. He simply stood there, moonlight etching his face in silver. "He is awake," Clara said quietly. The man didn't show any reaction. He said, "You are his uncle." This time, a nod. "What do you want?" she asked. A pause. "Then to know who you are," she swallowed. "My name is Clara Winslow." I taught at the parish school in Riverbend. I live here now. A longer pause. Then he said, "You gave him water." She nodded. He looked past her into the dim light of the cabin. "You saved his body, but what about his spirit?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know. After a moment he turned. Not a goodbye, just the soft crunch of his boots on earth as he walked away. She watched him return to the circle, take his place, and sit. She closed the door gently, and for the first time since she'd given that boy a sip of water, Clara wondered if she had done something sacred or something she would never be forgiven for. By the third morning, the dust on the horizon had settled into permanence. The warriors outside had not left, nor had they changed their posture. They sat in a wide circle around the cabin, never crossing the fence line, never shifting closer, but never letting the perimeter break. It felt less like a siege and more like a prayer. Inside, Clara moved with the quiet of a ghost. She ground herbs by hand for a poultice, boiled more water and coaxed the boy Tayo to drink small sips. He was stronger today. His eyes followed her now, wary but aware. He still hadn't spoken beyond that one word, uncle. He didn't ask questions. He didn't thank her, but every time she passed, his eyes found her. That was enough. In the late afternoon, a horse approached from the south, alone, its rider straight-backed and moving slow. Clara stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes against the glare. It was Reverend Alden, wearing his black coat and disapproving face. Even from a distance, she tensed. As he drew near, the warrior stood, not threatening, just present. He hesitated, clearly rattled, then pulled his horse to a stop just outside the line they'd. "Clara," he called out, "are you unharmed?" She nodded. "I'm fine." He eyed the Apache men like they were wolves he didn't dare turn his back on. "The town is concerned," he said. "We were told you were being held captive." "I'm not." He leaned forward on his saddle. "What are they doing here?" She hesitated. "Watch. For what?" "I don't know." The pastor frowned. "You need to come back with me. This isn't safe. You're being manipulated." "I'm not leaving," she said. A pause. Then in a softer voice, "This isn't like you." Clara blinked slowly. "You don't know me." His eyes narrowed. "You're aligning yourself with people who hate our ways, who don't worship our God." She looked past him, to the ridge where the wind stirred the yellow grass. Then she said, "They haven't once tried to change me." He opened his mouth to respond, but movement in the circle made him free. The older man, Cain, Tayo's uncle, was walking forward, not quickly, not angrily, just deliberately. He stopped at the edge of the path, his hands at his sides. Reverend Alden gripped his reins tighter. "What does he want?" Clara stepped down from the porch. "He wants you to go." Elgin stiffened. "You're making a mistake." "Probably," she said, "but it's mine to make." He stayed for a moment longer, then turned his horse. As he rode off, two warriors shifted to watch him go. The others never moved. That evening, as the sky turned red and shadows bled across the ground, Clara brought a blanket outside and sat near the fence. She didn't speak, didn't look at them directly, but she could feel their eyes on her. Eventually, Cain stood and approached. He didn't sit, he didn't speak. After a long silence, she asked, "Will you keep watching forever?" He replied, "Until we know." "Know what?" He turned to her, eyes ancient and unreadable. "If you gave him water to cleanse or to claim." Her brow furrowed. "I don't want anything from him." Cain didn't blink. "The land says otherwise." Then he turned and returned to the circle, and Clara sat there, shivering beneath the stars, wondering what the land had said, that she hadn't heard. That night, Clara dreamed of thunder, not from the sky but from the ground, hooves pounding, dirt splitting, flames licking the walls of her cabin, and above it all voices, sharp, angry, distorted into a language she didn't know but somehow understood. "You stepped where you shouldn't." She woke before dawn, drenched in sweat, but outside the warriors still sat, still silent, still waiting. Inside, Sieki had risen to one elbow. His face was gaunt, his skin pallid, but there was focus now, alertness. Clara knelt beside him and held out a cup of broth. He took it without protest, sipped slowly, and looked around the room for the first time, as though realizing he'd survived something he wasn't meant to. After a moment, he rasped, "You're not afraid?" She studied him. "Should I be?" He didn't answer. Instead, he glanced toward the window, then muttered, "They think you're trying to convert me." Clara blinked. "I'm not." He nodded faintly, not in trust but in understanding. "It doesn't matter." Silence stretched between them. Then he added, almost to himself, "They've lost too many to kindness." She sat back on her heels, the words cutting deeper than she expected. "I only gave you water." Sieki looked at her, really looked. "That's the beginning of everything." Later that morning, As the sun clawed its way into the sky, Clara ventured beyond the porch for the first time since the circle had formed. She walked slowly to the garden patch, the air thick with unspoken rules. None of the warriors moved, except Nope. He approached quietly, steps slow but grounded. "You stepped beyond the threshold now," he said. She paused by the edge of her herbs. It needed weeding. He didn't smile, but there was something like approval in his stillness. Then unexpectedly, he extended something toward her, a bundle wrapped in deerskin. She hesitated before taking it. Inside was dried meat, a pouch of herbs, and a carved wooden figure of an owl. Clara looked up. "Why?" Noko's voice was calm. "Because you did not run," she almost asked. Run from what? But she already knew, not just from them, from herself, from the judgment of the town, from the choice to see a dying boy as human, not a warning. That evening, the sound of horses returned, but not from the east, from the west. 3 riders, townmen. One of them Clara recognized. Gerald Silas Croft, son of the county magistrate and owner of half the land stretching toward Riverbend. They stopped just outside the circle, sneering. Silas Croft called out, "You hiding something, Miss Winslow?" She stepped onto the porch, slow and steady. "Not hiding, healing." He laughed. "Same thing if the man's Apache." The others chuckled. One held a torch. "Not lit." "Town's getting nervous," Silas Croft said. "Can't have redskins surrounding good Christian women without reason." "I gave them a reason," Clara said. Silas Croft's smile faded. "You feeding them too?" "No," she replied, "but they fed me." At that, Kane stepped into view. The men stiffened, hands twitching near holsters, but Kane didn't speak. He simply stood, watching, unmoving, unapologetic, and in that silence the wind shifted. Silas Croft spat into the dust. "This ain't over," he muttered. Then he turned his horse. They rode off, the unlit torch bouncing at his side. Clara stood there long after the dust settled, her pulse pounding in her ears. Behind her, the door creaked open. Tayo's voice was low. "They'll come again," she nodded. "I know." He studied her a long moment, then said, "You should have let me die." She turned, fire building in her chest. "Maybe, but then I wouldn't have learned anything about courage." He blinked, and for the first time looked ashamed. That night, as stars scattered across the black sky, Clara lit the oil lamp and placed it in the window, not as a beacon, not as a warning, but as a message. "I am not afraid of the Watchers. I am one of them now." The next morning, the lamp was still burning. Clara sat beside it, wrapped in her shawl, eyes hollow from a night without sleep. Outside, the warriors remained, quiet as ever. But something in the air had shifted. They weren't just watching her anymore, they were watching the land, waiting. Tayo could stand now, though only with effort. He limped to the door and leaned on the frame, squinting into the light. The circle of warriors did not move, but he nodded once toward them. "They stayed for me," he said. Clara stood beside him, arms crossed. "They stayed because they thought I would harm you." He looked at her. "Or change me." She didn't answer. Then he added, "Uncle knows now you didn't." A pause. "But the others?" She nodded slowly. "They don't trust me." "I don't blame them." That afternoon, Clara kneaded dough with shaking hands. Her flour was nearly gone, just enough left for a small round of bread. She thought about offering it to Kane, about breaking the wall between them with something older than words. But the idea felt wrong, presumptuous. She baked it anyway. As the bread cooled on the windowsill, she heard a soft knock. Not on the door, but on the wall. Tayo. He stood there, face taut with something she hadn't seen before. Restraint. "They want to speak with you," he said. She swallowed. "Who?" "The council." "Now." He nodded. She brushed the flour from her skirt and followed him out into the yard. The warriors didn't speak as she passed. They simply turned their heads, like trees leaning in the wind. They had formed a smaller circle beyond the garden. 7 men, seated on woven mats, backs straight, faces shadowed by the slanting light. Kane sat among them, but not at the center. He gestured for her to sit across from them. She did. Legs folded awkwardly under her, trying not to fidget. No one spoke for a long time. Then one of the elders, thin with eyes like flint, asked in broken English, "Why you stay alone?" Clara blinked. "Because I have nowhere else to go." Another voice, "You gave water to dying one." "Why?" She hesitated. "Because he was dying. Many die." "Yes," she said, "but not all are seen." The men looked at one another. One murmured something in Apache. Kane translated. He says, "You gave more than water. You gave place, shelter. That is different." Her eyes dropped. "I didn't mean to offend." You did not, Cain said, but some here fear. Your kindness has roots. She frowned. What do you mean? Roots grow. They change land. Silence. Then one of the younger warriors stepped forward. Not aggressive, just tired. We have lost many, he said. To missions, to schools, to small kindnesses with big endings. Clara's chest ached. I'm not one of them, she said quietly. Not anymore. More silence. Then Cain stood. He pulled a small object from his satchel and placed it on the ground between them. A bundle of sage wrapped in red thread. He pushed it toward her. We do not accept you, he said. Not yet. She held her breath. But we see you. Then the men rose one by one and walked away, leaving her alone with the sage and the dust. That evening, she placed the bundle on her windowsill beside the bread. The circle of warriors remained outside, but smaller now, fewer figures. Some had begun to depart, slipping away like mist in the morning. Only Cain stayed. And Tayo, who now stood outside each night beside the fire, staring toward the stars. They said nothing. They didn't have to. Something had been planted. Not trust, exactly, but maybe the beginning of. Clara had begun to sleep with one ear open, even when the cabin was silent and Tayo's breathing slow and steady beside the hearth. Something inside her refused to rest. The circle outside had thinned. Many of the Apache had returned to the hills, leaving only a few near the edges of her property. Cain remained, always just outside the line of firelight, always still. But on that night, the silence changed. It came in on hooves, fast, loud, sloppy. She knew instantly. These weren't the quiet riders from the hills. They were men from town. She rose in the dark, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and reached for the unloaded rifle she kept by the door, a prop more than a weapon, but something about holding it made her feel less small. Tayo was already awake, standing at the window, his body tense. How many? She asked. 4, he said. Maybe 5. Armed? He nodded. One has a torch. She stepped beside him and looked out. The riders were approaching from the west, cutting across the tall grass with the arrogance of men who believed nothing would stop them. Their laughter was sharp, their silhouettes unsteady in the moonlight. She recognized one almost immediately. Gerald, Silas Croft, the same man who'd come weeks before with warnings and smirks. Only this time he wasn't here to talk. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The night air was crisp, the wood beneath her feet cold. Tayo followed, barefoot, silent. The riders pulled up near the garden. Evening, Miss Winslow, one of them called. Heard you've got company. Laughter rippled through the group. Clara didn't answer. Silas Croft dismounted, swagger in every step. In his right hand he held a torch, already lit the flames, dancing high. We were worried, he said mockingly. Folks say you've been turned. Clara stood tall. Turned into what? A traitor? A savage lover? Take your pick. One of the other men dismounted and kicked through the herb patch, trampling what was left of her medicinal plants. Smells like witchcraft to me, he muttered. Tayo stepped forward, but Clara stopped him with a glance. I'm not alone, she said calmly. Silas Croft grinned. That's the problem, ain't it? He moved closer to the cabin with the torch raised, and then he stopped, because Cain appeared from the shadows just a few feet away, silent, immovable, with nothing in his hands but power in his presence. Silas Croft stiffened. You threatening me, old man? No answer. Cain's eyes were steady, unblinking, the kind of look a man remembered. The man with the torch lifted it higher, toward the eaves of the cabin. Tayo moved, fast as wind, hard as stone. He caught the man's wrist mid-air and twisted. The torch hit the ground, smothered instantly in dirt. The man cried out, stumbling backward, clutching his arm. Silas Croft pulled his revolver, half instinct. But Clara was faster than even she thought she could be. She raised the old rifle and aimed it straight at his chest. It wasn't loaded, but Silas Croft didn't know that. You came here to burn my home, she said, to hurt a boy I saved. What does that make you? Silas Croft's face twitched. You're making a mistake, Clara. I've made plenty. This isn't one of them. Behind her, Cain took a slow step forward. Silas Croft looked at him, then at Tayo, then back at Clara. He lowered the revolver, spat in the dirt. This ain't over. He turned and mounted. The others followed, their courage shriveling like smoke. They disappeared into the darkness, leaving only hoofprints and silence behind. Inside, the fire had burned low. Clara sat on the edge of the hearth, her hands shaking now that it was over. Cain stood near the door. Tayo leaned against. Oh, the wall, arms crossed. They'll come again, Tayo said quietly. Clara nodded. I know. She looked at Kane. I don't want to run. He met her gaze. Then you stay. She looked between them. The boy who was